The Sony ZV1 is probably one of the best vlogging cameras out there right now. It's actually been out a little while, but randomly last week I decided I was going to start a vlogging channel, and I've been playing around with this quite a bit. Watched a bunch of videos and figured out, for me, what I think is the best vlogging settings. So I want to walk through what I've been using and how to set this up from scratch if you're looking at using the ZV1 for vlogging. So let's jump down to my camera here, take a look at the back of the ZV1 and go over all the settings that I've been using. So if we jump straight into the menus here, now if you've bought the ZV1 for vlogging, chances are you're probably not going to be using it to take pictures. So we can skip right over this, and we can also skip right over this. We don't need to change either of those settings. However, here is where we need to make a decision which is quite significant in how the camera handles things. So when I was looking online, there were a lot of people that said you should typically use program auto, potentially shutter priority, or even manual if you want to. But after trying this out for a few days, I've come to the conclusion that the best settings and the footage looks the best when you use aperture priority. Now, essentially what this is doing for you is you set the aperture of the camera, and the camera is going to figure out everything else for you. Now, in my instance, I want to be able to see some bokeh, some background depth of field, and I typically set it to either F, let's just get back to the menu here so you can see, either f1.8 or f2, and I changed that using my scroll wheel right here, and that's the same way that yours will be set up straight out of the box. So whatever I change on here, you see the camera changes the shutter speed and the ISO accordingly. Now, I would recommend that you do the same. There's going to be a lot of people out there that say you should abide by the 180-degree rule when it comes to video, and I do agree. Apart from for vlogging. For vlogging, the important information is the content that's coming across, the story that you're trying to tell, whatever it is that you're showing. It doesn't need to look cinematic. And so for that reason, I think it's more important that you're kind of exposed properly than it is that you have a shutter speed that is 1/50th when you're shooting at 24 frames per second. So contrary to what a lot of people are going to say, I think you should be using auto ISO and auto shutter speed. Just live in aperture priority mode, and you set the aperture, the camera will do everything else. Scene selection is obviously grayed out. Drive mode is grayed out, so we don't need to change that. Bracket settings we don't need to change, nor do we need to change that. You're going to see through this video, it's very straightforward to set up this camera for vlogging. We want this camera to be a turn on, shoot what we need to shoot, and then turn it off again. That's it. That's the nature. What I've learned in like the last little bit doing this is you need it to be quickly and easily accessible, otherwise you're just not going to shoot anything. So that is what I'd recommend. So now we can go into menu 5 of 12 here, and for focus mode, continuous autofocus is definitely what you want to be using. Change your focus area to wide. There's different ones you can use here. Center would be great if you are always in the center, but that's not always going to be the case. I would recommend wide. The camera is looking at a whole of everything, and wide's going to be your best option when it comes to the setting for that. Face eye autofocus set. Face eye priority and autofocus, leave that on. Subject detection human, right left eye auto, face eye frame display on, animal eye display on. I mean, you can change those if you want to, if you are shooting animals, but that's what I would leave it as. Pre-autofocus turn off. Focus frame color is white. You can change the color if you want to. I just find white is a little bit easier to see. Red might be a bit too distracting in some instances, so I would use white. That's what I've been using. I like it. Autofocus area auto clear, leave that off. Display continuous autofocus area, leave that on, and change that, or it's probably actually already set like that. Don't touch it. And then for circle of focus point, don't touch that. Exposure compensation. So I saw some things online saying that for when you're shooting in the standard color, which is what I'm doing, and we'll get into that in a bit, exposure compensation should be +3. I played about with this for a few days. I disagree. I think it should be 0.0. For your ISO on this, again, a lot of people are going to say that you don't want to go this high. I disagree. I find that it's better to get the content in the story and have it somewhat lit and grainy than be too dark and you can't even see what's going on. So for your ISO, I would leave it at auto. Set your minimum to 125 and your ISO maximum to 8000. ND filter, leave off. We don't need to use that for this. It's a great feature, but we don't need to use it. Metering mode, multi. If you have it set to anything else, change it to multi. Believe me, it's going to handle it better. Face priority in multi-metering, leave set to on. Okay, we can skip through that. White balance. People are going to disagree. Auto. Again, you want the camera to turn on get your video, turn it off again. You don't want to be fumbling around with white balance and selecting it for different rooms and everything like that. The camera's going to do a pretty good job in general, but remember, we're vlogging here. We're not creating cinematic sequences or anything like that. It doesn't need to look fantastic. The information is what the content of this video is. Priority set and auto white balance, leave to standard. DRO/auto HDR, I would turn this off. You don't need the camera figuring out anything more than you've told it to figure out already. Here's a big topic as well, and I saw a lot of people having difference of opinions when it comes to the creative style to use and the picture profile to use. The ZV1 does have S-Log2 and it also has S-Log3, which you will hear people talk about. There's a lot of people out there that say you should use S-Log2. However, this is an 8-bit S-Log, which means that it's going to be very, very hard to grade and you have to nail your exposure perfectly. Otherwise, you could very easily ruin your image. S-Log3 is a no-go. Avoid it. It's 8-bit. S-Log3 is great for the A7S III. For the FX3 I'm shooting this on, it's 10-bit. Avoid it with the ZV1. A lot of people have also said the HLG is pretty good. If you want to have some playability, something you can grade a little bit more in post and you get a little bit more dynamic range. However, like I've said with everything else, you want this camera to be quickly and easily accessible to shoot content, edit it, upload it, get it ready to go. For that reason, I recommend that you use Creative Style Standard. Just leave it as it is, straight out the box with one change, and that is to reduce saturation by -1. Contrast 0, saturation -1, sharpness 0. Leave it at that. It doesn't look bad. It looks good. If you want to add some more saturation in after the fact in post, you can do. It's kind of punchy straight out the camera with the ZV1 at 0. So go to -1. That's a pretty decent color. For vlogging, to throw in, to edit, to export quickly, that's a good color. You don't need to worry about it looking fancy or anything like that. Stick with standard, believe me. All right, next. Soft skin effect. If you want to turn this on, you can. If you want it to make you glow, then yeah, sure. But I would recommend leave it turned off. You're not really going to be using any of these features. Focus magnifier, focus magnification time, initial focus magnification. These are manual focus controls, essentially, or assists. Things to help you manually focus. You're not going to be manually focusing with this camera when it comes to vlogging. Skip through it. As for this, leave it off. As for this, leave it on. All this other stuff's grayed out, great. You don't need to use it. Exposure mode, as I said before, aperture priority. If you want to play about with something else, you can. But believe me, you are going to come back to aperture priority. It's the easiest one. You want yourself to have some depth of field like I've got here. That's the best way to get it. You tell the camera the aperture you want it to use, and it will figure out everything else for you. File format, XAVC S4K. If you don't want to shoot 4K, then just do the same thing, but for HD. Record setting, this is your bitrate. Now, you want it to be the best quality for this, obviously. If you want to shoot in 30, then do 30p, 100 megabits. I shoot 24p, 100 megabits. We'll leave it at that. HFR settings, this is high frame rate. Avoid it. You don't need to touch it. For 24 frames per second vlogging, you don't need to touch it. Quality of dual recording mode, leave it. You don't need to touch it. Don't need to touch that. Don't need to touch that. Don't need to touch that. Autofocus drive speed. So for this one, you want it to be fast. You want your autofocus to pick you up when you're moving about, doing things, going in the frame, out the frame, focusing on things, not focusing on things, or putting a hand in front of the camera, like up. You want it to be fast. Whatever you've got in front of the frame, you want it to focus on it as fast as it can. Leave that on fast. Responsive, instead of standard, is going to be a tracking sensitivity as well. Auto slow shutter, leave that turned on. Initial focus magnification, again, just leave it. You don't need to touch it. Audio recording, obviously leave on. Audio recording level, I've bumped mine up to about 18 and I find this pretty good. It comes out the box around 15. At 15, not around 15. But I've put mine up to 18 and I find that pretty good. Audio display level, you want to leave that on. That gives you the bars on there so you can see. It gives you basically these bars right here. It will give you those all the time so you can see if your audio is too loud for whatever reason. There's something in the background that's making it peak. If you needed to turn it down, then you could. So I'd leave audio display level on. Wind noise reduction off. You've got the little wind sock on the top here, the dead cat that goes into the cold shoe. You don't need to use wind noise reduction. You don't want the camera thinking there's wind when there's not and just screwing up your audio, so leave that off. Steady shot. So this is tough because Sony's active stabilization is very good and it does smooth out things which are kind of shaky for vlogging. However, it crops it. You're already at 24 millimeters in terms of a focal length for this, so that's kind of tight for vlogging. If you crop it any more, it's not great. So I tried it with active on, and I just decided to leave it at standard. Vlogging, as I said, we're turning the camera on, we're capturing the content, whatever I'm saying, whatever's going on in the day, that is the information. It doesn't need to look good or anything like that. If it's shaky, great. It's a vlog. It doesn't matter. Steady shot, standard. Marker display on. Now, for the markers, I actually just like to use one marker, and that's the center marker. I just like to know where the center of the frame is. It's good to see that on the screen there. That's super useful. If you want to turn on your aspect ratios, you can. For vlogging, it's not really necessary, if I'm honest. Recording lamp, leave on. That's an obvious one. That's the red light on the front of the camera. You know when you're recording. You want to use that. Otherwise, you have to look at the screen all the time. Movie with shutter. So what this is on the top there, your shutter button. So the recording button is great. It's red. It's obvious that it's a record button, but the shutter button's at the front. And when you're holding the camera out, it's easier just to push the shutter button, or we'll have the option to push both. So actually turn that to on. You can turn that to off. What that means is you'll only be able to record with the recording button. I would recommend leave it on. It's just easier. If you want to stream with USB streaming, you can. We're not going over that today, so we don't need to worry about it. Shutter type. We're going to leave it at auto. We're not playing around with photos today. We don't need to touch that. Release without card, enable. Again, this is a photo mode. You don't need to touch it. Steady shot for photos, you can leave on. You're not going to be touching it. Zoom speed, optical only. So zoom is useful when you're vlogging. Occasionally, you flip the camera around. You want to zoom in on this camera or something like that. Leave it to optical only. You don't want it to go into digital. And zoom speed fast, because if you are zooming, you want to be able to zoom in quickly. You don't want it to be slow. You want it to be, here's what I'm looking at. Here's what I want you to look at. And then zoom back out. So optical zoom only, fast. And then for display button, this will show you all the information. So when we go, if I go back here, I have to stop recording, sorry. That's the button right there, the shutter. If you want it to record when you hit the shutter button, that's what it will do. So display, when you push up on display here, it will show you all the different options that you have, and it will cycle through them all. So if you don't want some of those in there, if you turn these off, it won't display that. I just leave mine all on. Zebras, if you want to use them, great, but it's vlogging. You don't need to. Just leave it off. Leave that as is. You don't need to touch any of your custom buttons. And audio signals, turn those on. I don't normally have them on for these cameras, but I've realized for vlogging, it's actually useful just if you hit the button to record and then you put the camera like down by your side again and you just audibly hear that it's turned off, or pushing it as you're pulling it up and you hear it's recording. You see the red light on there. Having multiple things to tell you're recording and you've stopped recording is useful. And then you can leave all this. Don't have to touch any of it. To be honest with you, now, other than a couple of things, power save start time. Leave that to 2 minutes. So the batteries in these cameras aren't great. If you forget to turn it off for whatever reason, 2 minutes is good. It will turn itself off. And then your auto power off temperature, set that to high opposed to standard. This does mean if the camera overheats or starts to get warm, it won't turn off when it's like a little bit warm. It'll wait till it gets really, really hot before it actually turns off. That's a better setting to leave it on. Depending on part of the world you're in, NTSC or PAL. I'm in North America, so NTSC. Touch operation, leave that on. And that's it. You don't need to play with anything else. That's as simple as it can be to set up the Sony ZV1. This is a camera you don't need to worry about with all the different settings. If you want to use this to shoot other things, then it's a different story. But for simple vlogging, that's all you need to do when it comes to this camera to get good video, in my opinion. People will probably disagree, but it is what it is. Hopefully you got something out of that video. Thank you for watching. If you want to check out the vlog channel, again, I'll put it up there. There's also a link down below. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.